The end of a habitual burglar. After working as a detective for many years, you inevitably encounter one or two mysterious incidents. One of the criminals I arrested was a stingy thief named Matsuki. He was a habitual burglar, and I had a long history with him. He would get arrested, then get released, and the cycle would repeat itself. I don't know how many times I heard Matsuki say, "I'll change my ways." Speaking of which, Matsuki's father was a hopeless alcoholic who would violently abuse his family every time he drank. His mother couldn't take it anymore and left. Matsuki was left with his father, and they lived in poverty. At the time, Matsuki was in second grade, and since his father didn't work, they struggled to make ends meet. That's when Matsuki started stealing, he said. It's a harrowing story of a difficult childhood, and it's certainly a story that evokes sympathy. But that doesn't mean one can justify turning to crime because of one's upbringing or circumstances. I've explained that to him many times, and I think he understood. However, once a person gets used to the easy life, it's hard to break free from it. There was one time when Matsuki turned himself in. He confessed to committing a burglary. At that time, there had been a series of burglaries in the jurisdiction. Based on the modus operandi, Matsuki was the first suspect, but then the incidents suddenly stopped. About a month later, Matsuki turned himself in. I was the one who interrogated him at the time, but something about Matsuki seemed off. He was usually the type to evade questions and be hard to pin down, but this time he seemed restless. To put it another way, he looked like he was afraid of something. Matsuki said this right off the bat. "Mr. Kuroda, I'm going to stop stealing. I'm sure I'll be punished for it." He had said this many times before, so I thought, here we go again. I figured it was just another act. However, seeing Matsuki's terrified expression, I sensed that something was different this time. And so, Matsuki began to speak, looking frightened. "Mr. Kuroda. First, before I tell you this story, there were 6 burglaries in this area. Those were my doing. I admit it without hesitation. Now, what I'm about to tell you is a truly absurd story, and I know it's unreasonable to ask you to believe it, but I want to tell you anyway. Mr. Kuroda, who has helped me out so many times, I came forward because I wanted you to hear this. Please understand that feeling. It was just about a month ago. I was staying in a place a little ways from here. I've been in this line of work for a long time, so my instincts told me I was about to be caught. So I was staying in a certain rural area. It was a hideout, so to speak, and there was a house that caught my eye. An old woman lived alone in that house. From what I could gather, she was living alone. I pretended to be a renovation contractor and asked around the neighborhood, and everyone said that an old woman lived alone in that house. After watching the house for a while, an ambulance arrived. Apparently, the old woman had collapsed. I waited all day, but even after evening, there was no sign of the old woman returning. So I decided to go home and prepare for the night. So I started work after 10 p.m. I went around to the back of the entrance, opened the side door, and went inside. There was a large kitchen, and beyond that was the living room. The old woman must have been eating, because there were senbei crackers and tea snacks left on the low table. I was careful not to let the light from my flashlight leak outside, and when I searched the shelf next to it, I immediately found something valuable. After borrowing them, I opened the sliding door next to me and found myself in the Buddhist altar room. It was quite a spacious room for a Buddhist altar room. There were several portraits of my ancestors on the beams. Even though I've been in this business for a long time, I still can't get used to seeing those portraits. It feels like they're watching me, you know. Anyway, I rummaged through the Buddhist altar and other things and found what I was looking for. Thinking this was a good start, I left the room. As I stepped out, a long corridor stretched before me, with several rooms on either side. Looking toward the entrance, there was a staircase on the right. Since I couldn't linger, I made my way through the first floor, checking every room, until I reached the staircase. Even though it was an empty house, I quietly went upstairs without making any noise, and found 2 rooms on each side at the end of the straight hallway. I checked the rooms one by one, starting with the ones closest to me, but there was nothing of interest on the second floor. Just as I was about to enter the room at the far right, something happened. As I reached for the sliding door, the doorbell suddenly rang. Ping pong. I was startled, of course. Without hesitation, I said, "Excuse me." I heard a man's voice. I didn't know if it was someone from the neighborhood or a relative, but I think it was around 11 p.m. I was trying to stay quiet and hide, but the intercom rang again. Then, "Excuse me," the same man's voice said again. Then I thought to myself, if he was a neighbor, he must know that an ambulance came during the day and took the old woman away. If that's the case, is the man a relative? As I was thinking about that, "Excuse me," the voice sounded again. Listening to his voice, I thought he was a pretty persistent guy. And what business could he possibly have at an old lady's house at this late hour, especially when she lives alone? It just didn't seem natural for a man to visit at that time of night. I mean, right? She's an elderly woman living alone. If she has nothing to do, she'd just go to bed, wouldn't she? In fact, I did some research on this house, and they start closing the shutters at 5 p.m. So why would someone go out of their way to visit the house at such a late hour? Besides, these days, every old man and woman has a cell phone, and even if they don't, there's at least a landline at home. I saw the phone right next to the entrance, after all. Even if it were a relative, if the old lady were hospitalized and someone came to pick up her change of clothes, would it be necessary to say, "Excuse me"? No, it wouldn't. Then, if it were one of my colleagues, well, no one would be so stupid as to ring the intercom and say, "Excuse me." So, when I calmly considered who the man calling out at the front door might be, I started to feel a chill down my spine. If it's not a neighbor or a relative, does that mean someone found out I broke into this house? Maybe the light from my flashlight was leaking out, or someone heard the noise. As I pondered these possibilities, "Excuse me." Once again, a man's voice rang out. What should I do? Where should I hide? As I was pondering these questions, I suddenly realized something. The call I had just heard seemed unusually clear. No, it wasn't just a feeling. There was no doubt about it. It wasn't a voice from outside the house. It was coming from inside the house. But that was strange. There was no sound of the front door opening. So how did he get inside? As I was thinking that, creak, creak, creak. Someone. No, it was definitely that man. I could hear the sound of someone slowly climbing the stairs. It was definitely, undoubtedly, coming closer to me. If I stay here, I'll be found. I panicked a little and tried to enter the room in front of me. But the sliding door wouldn't open, probably because it was poorly constructed. If I forced it open, it would make a noise. I was at a loss. While I was panicking, footsteps were approaching. All is lost. I missed my chance to hide, and I was half resigned to my fate. But at the top of the stairs, there was a loud creak, but no one was there. From the sound of the footsteps, it was clear that someone had climbed the stairs. I stared intently at the end of the hallway for a moment, but I didn't sense anyone else there. Maybe I had just mistaken the creaking of the house for footsteps, I told myself, and I let out a sigh of relief. "Excuse me." I heard that voice nearby. The voice was coming from behind the sliding door I was working on. I let out a small scream. At the same time, as I tried to leave, my feet got tangled and I fell into the hallway. Then the sliding door opened. But there was no one there. However, on the other side, the room was filled with countless Japanese dolls scattered haphazardly. Faced with this bizarre sight, I let out a scream. because those countless Japanese dolls were staring at me as if glaring. I tried to hurry away from the scene, but my legs gave out, and my body wouldn't move as I wanted it to. As I crawled along the hallway. There you are. The moment I heard that voice, I was paralyzed, unable to move. I was stuck in a crawling position, unable to move, when suddenly I sensed someone behind me. But since my body wouldn't move, I couldn't turn around. So I couldn't confirm the presence with my eyes, but I could feel that something was approaching me. It felt like a large man. Then, the man climbed onto my back while I was unable to move. I felt a heavy weight on my back, from my waist to my chest. It was quite heavy. My chest was compressed, making it hard to breathe. Then, he began to choke me from behind. The force was so intense that I thought, oh, I'm going to die like this. Finally, I couldn't breathe anymore, and everything went black before my eyes. At that moment, I thought, I shouldn't have broken into this place. So, in the end, you're still alive. Well, yeah. I thought I was going to die, though. So, you had a strange experience in the house you entered? Yes. Where was it? Which region were you in? It's in a place called village in prefecture. Prefecture. You sure ran far away, laughs. No wonder they couldn't find you. But expecting me to believe that story. I know it's hard to believe. But this really happened. I get that, but why are you telling me this? Do you want to add to your list of crimes? Even if I add 1 or 2 more now. That's a joke, but I've caused a lot of trouble for Mr. Kuroda, and after this incident, I've decided not to break into houses anymore. I think it's karma for what I've done in the past. I know it's hard to believe such a ridiculous story, but I don't want to go through such a scary experience again. So I might as well change my ways. I've heard that before. This time, I'm really serious. Well, whatever. If you're serious about changing your ways, I'll give it some serious thought. Let's put that aside for now. We have another interrogation tomorrow, so let's call it a day. Got it. And so, I finished the interrogation for the day and went home. I didn't know how serious Matsuki was, but I thought I'd give him the benefit of the doubt and believe him when he said he'd change his ways. With that on my mind, I had a drink at my favorite izakaya and went home. I fell asleep around midnight. I woke up to the sound of my cell phone ringing loudly. It was 4 a.m. When I answered the phone, it was someone from the local police station. The man named Matsuki who Mr. Kuroda interrogated yesterday. He passed away in the detention center. What was the last thing Matsuki saw? His eyes were wide open, and he had a terrifying expression on his face when he died. The cause of death was acute heart failure. There was no suspicion of foul play, and it was ruled a sudden death. Matsuki, who had no family, was cremated and buried in a public cemetery. He was an untrustworthy guy, but I didn't think he was lying about that story. He wasn't the type to get involved with drugs, so I want to believe it's true. That said, I don't usually believe in such stories myself. However, there is still something puzzling. The village where Matsuki said there was a house like the one he described. I looked into it, but I couldn't find the village. So I contacted the prefectural police in that prefecture. I thought maybe the village name had disappeared due to a merger or something. Then they said, "We looked into it, but there is no evidence that such a village ever existed." Matsuki, where did you see it and what did you see? This is the end of this story. Thank you for listening to the end.